B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, April 18th, 2019. The day many people have been waiting for, if only to get it over with. The Meuller report, having been spun and redacted by Trump's henchman, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, was finally released to Congress and the public today. And the media reports I'm working off, let me be candid, I haven't had time to read the report itself. I have provided a link to the Washington Post's annotated version of the document. And over the long Easter break, I'm going to take the opportunity to read as much as I can, and perhaps you will too. So these are not my final comments on the Meuller report. They are initial comments based on media reports. Okay? I think that's clear. Number one, I believe that these news accounts indicate that there is sufficient material related to obstruction of justice for the Democrats in the House of Representatives to bring impeachment proceedings and to hold a vote to indict Donald Trump for obstruction of justice. And, of course, the big question is, will they? All indications are that the Democrats are completely opposed, deeply allergic to attempting to impeach this president. I think their calculations, which are poll-driven, are short-sighted and wrong. And fundamentally, I believe that this should not be a political calculation about whether, it'll affect the 2020 election, whether Democrats could hold the House, whether they could regain the Senate. No, I believe that this president is so corrupt and so out of his league that Democrats should use the Meuller report to impeach the Mofo, as Rashida Tlaib has characterized it in a moment of exuberance. But Gerald Nadler, who chairs the House Judiciary Committee, is making these stern, really, extreme, not extreme, but aggressive comments. He said lawmakers have to get to the bottom of what happened and take whatever action seems necessary at that time. And when pressed by a reporter, is impeachment on the table? Nadler said that's one possibility. There are others. Now, yesterday, before any of the report was available, I heard an interview with Maxine Waters, chair of the Banking Committee, and she mentioned impeachment. She's the only one willing to defy the political leadership of Pelosi and Schumer in the Senate to blurt out the truth about this. But when Nadler says that's one possibility, there are others, well, not really. Because nothing has the impact, the emotional weight of impeachment. And all these other investigations, even if judiciary takes up an investigation on the obstruction of justice claims, it's just another committee that can be, described as partisan, witch hunt, fake news, all that stuff that Trump loves to say. And until you threaten him with potential removal from office, I believe nothing will change. And in many respects, that leaves us with a Meuller report that we'll all remember as, well, it finally put an end to that Russiagate stuff. But if the Democrats are unwilling to do what I consider to be their constitutional duty, then this is simply an extremely irritating and depressing investigation that led to pretty much nowhere. Now, before I dive into the descriptions of the Meuller report and some of my comments, one of the things that I've been looking for I still haven't seen. Now, I'm relying so far just on the New York Times and the Washington Post because they've got more reporters who could very quickly digest the report and put out the news articles about it. But there is nothing mentioned so far that provides the evidence that is claimed in the Barr letter from, 3 weeks ago, that in fact the Russian GRU hacked the DNC servers and gave that information to WikiLeaks. And maybe you think I'm just an obsessive guy who's stuck on one detail. But this was the fundamental claim that propelled the whole Russiagate telenovela. And maybe the media organs that invested so much in Russiagate, with all the reporting based on leaks, anonymous sources, evidence that was not in public view, maybe they're a little embarrassed to present that. But at this point, I am still searching for the evidence that Meuller claims would prove that WikiLeaks got the proceeds of Democratic computers from Russian agents. And if that is established, I will happily concede and cite the evidence that's given. But so far, it is not in view. I'd also say that the Meuller report and the media accounts maintain the fiction, the huge exaggerations that the Internet Research Agency, the troll farm in St. Petersburg, had any significant impact on how Americans thought or how they decided to vote in 2016. But by citing that, Meuller circles back to the indictments that will go nowhere that were issued on July 13th last year, and it maintains the image, the perception, that there was measurable Russian meddling in the 2016 campaign. And I've always acknowledged that Russia has interests in disrupting our political process, that Russia had a real axe to grind against Hillary Clinton and was eager to take on a neophyte who they thought they could manipulate. And basically, that's what Meuller concludes, that Russia was trying to do things to impact our election, and to the extent that Trump knew about it or was aware of it, he didn't do anything to stop it. But as Meuller concluded, that does not rise to the level of criminal activity. And you could call it collusion. And Bill Barr, in that really weird press conference that he gave this morning before the report was issued, I believe they counted 6 times. He said, no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. And that was for the guy who was watching the news conference on Fox News, which was probably interrupting his favorite Fox and Friends show. So I've tried to organize this a little bit. I have 10 different articles in front of me. I have highlighted things that I'm going to mention to you. It may be a little disjointed. I may repeat a few things because of the way the news articles cover different elements. So in a bit, we will detail the 10 actions by Trump that Meuller examined that could reach the level of obstruction of justice. And we'll also talk about Mueller's thinking about why he didn't move further to declare that the president was indictable either currently or after he leaves office. And I believe that he was tossing this hot potato into the laps of Democrats in Congress with the knowledge. It's not like Bob Mueller's been sequestered and he doesn't know that Nancy Pelosi is refusing to even consider impeaching Trump. And as you know, I'm skeptical of St. Bob Meuller. Suspicious. Don't trust him. And this whole thing could be a limited hangout where, he provides a report that confirms there was some meddling, but he doesn't lead to any action against the president. And keep in mind, he's a lifelong Republican. Bill Barr, lifelong Republican. James Comey, lifelong Republican. Rod Rosenstein. And all these people are buddies, going back to the first Bush administration. Now, the news agencies, I'm looking at the New York Times coverage here right now, they got a lot of juice out of the conflict in the White House. And there were some zingers here, where in June of 2017, Trump called his White House counsel, Don McGahn, from Camp David twice and told him to have Mueller fired for alleged conflicts of interest. McGahn refused. He prepared to submit his resignation. He called Reince Priebus, who was then the White House chief of staff, and told him the president had asked him to do crazy shit. Ultimately, Trump backed off. But when the incident leaked, Trump told McGahn to publicly deny it, and McGahn, who does seem to have a little bit of ethical spine, he said no. So Trump now refers to McGahn as a lying bastard, and he ultimately was forced out of the White House. One of the things that was really weird about Barr's commentary as he attempts to spin this for the benefit of the president and his fans who are incurious, right, who won't try to get any more information than what they learned from Fox or from Trump's tweets. Well, Bill Barr felt sorry for Trump, that he wasn't really trying to obstruct justice. He was just frustrated and angered by his sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents and fueled by illegal leaks. Such empathy. Bill Barr, sensitive guy, really cares about Trump's feelings. Also, we learned that the president's personal counsel, that's plural, his lawyers, requested and were given an opportunity to read a final redacted version of the report earlier this week. Rudy Giuliani says Tuesday night he spent hours in a secret room at the Justice Department reading it. I consider that inappropriate. But we have to remember, and I've been yakking about this since the get-go, Bob Mueller is not an independent special prosecutor under the old law. He is a special counsel who reports to the Attorney General. That was known from the outset, and it's one of the warning flags that I flew very early on. The end game of Mueller is really unknown. That's where we were even a week ago in many respects. So there are 14 investigations spawned from this. 12 are still confidential. The two we know about, Mike Cohen, and the recent charges against Gregory Craig for lying to investigators about his work for Manafort in Ukraine. And I must note that the New York Times continues to mislead by saying that Manafort was working for a pro-Russian government in Ukraine. Yanukovych fled to Russia, but his government was pro-U.S. until the coup that was backed by the U.S. that took him out of power. Let's see. Next we have the information here about collusion. And, quoting from the special counsel, under applicable law, publication of these types of materials would not be criminal. This is relating to the purloined DNC materials, all right? Publication of these types of materials would not be criminal unless the publisher also participated in the underlying hacking conspiracy. Now, note this closely. They're saying that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, because in this case they were not a part of the, quote, underlying hacking conspiracy, end quote, that they didn't do anything wrong. But Assange is now facing a U.S. indictment on the single charge of attempting to, they don't use the word hack, I love it's a special term, infiltrate or whatever it is, gain access to. That's what Assange is being accused of because he allegedly helped Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning, attempt to guess the password, and they weren't successful. Assange wasn't successful, and that's why I compare it to walking past your neighbor's house and trying the door. And if it's locked, nothing happens, right? Maybe you leave your fingerprints, but it's not considered to be a crime. If you opened that door and trespassed, it would. So anyway, I found that to be an interesting reference. And Bill Barr's bizarre press conference performance had the audience of one. And we can tell that Trump was pleased with Bill Barr's performance because he tweeted a photo based on a Game of Thrones poster depicting Trump staring into a cloud, saying no collusion, no obstruction for the haters and radical left Democrats, game over. Now that's what Trump wants to believe. And I hope that his arrogance and taunting the Democrats might be enough to goad them into action to impeachment. I know I'm daydreaming, but that's the way it ought to be, in my humble opinion. And what I've learned is that the report runs, I think, 448 pages altogether. More than 12 are fully redacted. Other pages had sections of text blacked out, including full paragraphs, and in others just a word or two here and there have been redacted. And now going through some of the teased out highlights from a team of reporters at the New York Times, starting with, if there was no collusion and no obstruction, why were White House people lying so much? And that always has been a question. What were they covering up? I've always believed there was a cover-up. I just didn't think it was about the alleged Russian interference in order to help Trump. And we've circled around the theories about the Trump Moscow project and the lies that were told about that. Next item, Trump's lawyers massaged Michael Cohen's testimony, but Meuller didn't establish that Trump told him to lie. And this is the central point of the BuzzFeed article that they continue to stand by, claiming that Cohen was instructed by the president. And I haven't had time to examine BuzzFeed's coverage to see if they've made any alterations to those claims. The commentary here from one of the Times reporters is that Cohen lied to Congress about the Moscow deal. Trump's legal team advised Cohen to keep his statements short and tight, do not elaborate, stay on message, and do not contradict the president. But that is not the same as being instructed or ordered to lie by the president, and it does seem that BuzzFeed went out on a limb there, and it appears to have been sawed off. Next up, the compromising tapes, the alleged P-tapes in the Steele dossier. And by the way, the coverage is pretty sketchy on the origins of the investigation and on the so-called P-tape and other elements in the Steele dossier. But this is a new report based on the investigation by Meuller and his team. In October of 2016, Michael Cohen received a text from Russian businessman Georgy Richelaja. That's quite a name. Needs some extra vowels. And it said, stopped flow of tapes from Russia, but not sure if there's anything else, just so you know. Now, in his apparent interview with the special counsel's investigators, the Russian man said tapes referred to compromising tapes, and he said he was told the tapes were fake. But he didn't tell Cohen that. So this doesn't fully resolve whether there are compromising videotapes out there, but it adds a new little factoid to it. So then the issue of whether the obstruction issues rose to the level that Meuller either should have issued an indictment that would be effective when Trump leaves office, or actively referred to Congress with a recommendation that they pursue an impeachment investigation into obstruction. None of that happened. Now it appears that as a loyal foot soldier of the Justice Department, that Bob Meuller would not contravene the policy, which is not a law, not to indict a sitting president. And in his language, he talks about how busy the president is and how disruptive it could be. And I think that given that self-imposed restriction, that Meuller then felt that, number one, it would be prejudicial to recommend the obstruction claim, but he did go out of his way, as we'll cite a little bit later here, to say, look, I'm not exonerating this guy. There is evidence, but somebody else is going to have to do something with it. Mueller's investigation clears Michael Cohen of the allegation in the Steele dossier that he met with a Russian operative in Prague in May of, I believe it was in May of 2016, and it appears that Cohen was telling the truth when he said that he never went to Prague. Next, an item, Barr heavily redacted evidence about the Trump campaign's outreach to WikiLeaks. Now, this can be explained because Roger Stone's trial doesn't come up until later this year. And Jerome Corsi, who was alleged to be one of the conduits between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks, has gone public and said that he did not provide such a role, that he never had any direct contact with WikiLeaks or Julian Assange, and that that Mueller basically tried to pressure him into taking a guilty plea deal, despite Corsi's claims of complete innocence. So we haven't resolved that, but the redactions could be understandable. Next item, special counsel found evidence of plenty other crimes, made 14 referrals, and I mentioned that Greg Craig and Michael Cohen are the two that are known publicly. Mueller explains his decision not to interview the president. Quote, ultimately, while we believe that we had the authority and legal justification to issue a grand jury subpoena to obtain the president's testimony, we chose not to do so. We made that decision in the view of the substantial delay that such an investigative step would likely produce at a late stage in our investigation. Well, that's a pretty flimsy excuse, isn't it? I mean, he ran for 20 months. And he only decided late in the game that, it'd take too long. We don't want a long, drawn-out lawsuit. He could have filed that, 60 days after he started the investigation. Obviously, the president's testimony was central to many of the allegations that Mueller was tasked to investigate. So this is another cop-out, and this is another reason that I'm suspicious of St. Bob Mueller. And in addition to not interviewing Trump, they didn't interview Julian Assange. I went into depth in yesterday's podcast about that. They didn't interview, to my knowledge, Stephen Halper, this Republican political operative who appears to have been running part of the operation in Britain and who appears to have set the trap for George Papadopoulos. And I don't see any reference to Israel's efforts to contact the incoming Trump administration before they took office to try to block Obama's plan to vote present in a critical UN Security Council measure critical of Israel. Next, the terminology. This is a quote from the Meuller report. Like collusion, coordination does not have a settled definition in federal criminal law. We understood coordination to require an agreement, tacit or express, between the Trump campaign and the Russian government on election interference. That requires more than the two parties taking actions that were informed by or responsive to the other's actions or interests. So they're saying that there was no explicit agreement, whether it was written or verbal or just, baseball coaching signals. And this really destroys one of the central claims of the Russiagate promoters. Next item, Mueller found that several prominent contacts between Trump campaign people and Russia were innocuous, as was the platform change at the Republican convention in the summer of 2016 to go softer on Russia. And I always felt that that was a silly issue because nobody cares about what's in the party's political platform, and changes occur for fundraising reasons, for domestic political appeal, and I just never thought there was anything substantial behind that. So now to Mueller's arguments related to obstruction. He said several features of the conduct that we investigated distinguish it from typical obstruction of justice cases. First, the investigation concerned the president, and some of his actions, like firing the FBI director, are, on the face of them, lawful acts within his constitutional authority. At the same time, his position as head of the executive branch offered him unique and powerful means of influencing official proceedings, subordinate officers, and potential witnesses, all of which is relevant to a potential obstruction of justice analysis. I also believe that criminal obstruction of justice is a much higher standard than what Congress would evaluate in the context of impeachment. And that's why I keep harping on that. Impeachment is the solution, the resolution to this whole ugly process. Next item, Trump tried to limit what would be publicly disclosed about Don Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer. And Meuller notes that the president edited a press statement for his son by deleting a line that acknowledged the meeting was with an individual who Donnie Boy Jr. was told might have information helpful to the campaign. And that meeting, to me, the real unexplored issue is what role the lawyer Natalia, I think she is, Veselnitskaya, played, because she was representing Russian interests related to the Magnitsky Act, and she was also on the payroll of Fusion GPS. And I haven't seen anything mentioned so far in this coverage about Fusion GPS. This little disclosure from the Meuller report was seized upon by a Washington Post reporter in the first round analysis. And it's headlined here, Putin steps up outreach to Trump, hoping to make contacts with Trump transition team. Now, I want to be clear, this is all after the November 2016 election. Putin appeared to, it says, escalate. I put in my comments here, or was it initiate, efforts to work through the Russian oligarchs with an all-hands meeting with their with the top businessmen in December of 2016. And the whole goal was to use any available channel to try to overturn the sanctions that Obama had imposed on Russia. And again, I don't find that very incriminating. That's politics. That's international relations. Trump was designated the winner. You know, I don't accept it as legitimate. But Moscow said, okay, here comes the new guy. How are we going to get our way with him? Here's another item. In the firing of James Comey, the president's draft termination letter, which was written by Rod Rosenstein, who stood behind Bill Barr at the press conference today, and to my knowledge, didn't say a word. Rosenstein is the guy who wrote the pretextual letter to fire Comey, and then turned around, and because Jeff Sessions had recused himself, he became the guy who hired Bob Meuller for this limited hangout investigation. So what is curious about this is that after that letter was published, Sarah Huckabee Sanders told the press that the White House had heard from countless FBI agents who had lost confidence in Comey. But the evidence doesn't support those claims. We understand that when Trump had dinner with Comey, he told him on January 27th, the people of the FBI really like you. And then Sarah Sanders acknowledged to Mueller's investigators that her comments were, quote, not founded on anything. I'll translate that for you, friends. Bullshit. Sarah Sanders traffics in bullshit. Also, there is a passage here in a summary article by the Washington Post writers, and it's got a headline, many of Trump's fake news claims are disproven. Now, this is a loaded claim because, honestly, many of the fake news assertions that Trump has made are actually true. But many of them, because he's a consistent liar, are not true. So it's more self-protection on the part of the media outlets. So now we turn to the issues related to obstruction. There are 10 of them. 1, conduct involving FBI Director Comey and Mike Flynn when Trump said, I hope you can see your way to letting this go. 2, the president's reaction to the continuing Russia investigation. And we're told that when Trump was advised that Bob Mueller had been hired as the special counsel, he said, "I'm fucked, and this is the end of my presidency." Those are interesting tidbits. It's colorful, but it doesn't really necessarily mean that he's guilty of obstruction. Not in that specific instance. His firing of Comey, the appointment of the special counsel, the efforts to curtail the special counsel's investigation, including orders repeatedly to fire Bob Mueller. And it is interesting that his underlings in many respects protected Trump from further obstructing justice by refusing to carry out his orders. And there seem to be a lot of those orders that get ignored. Then there was the effort to publicly disclose that that's the Trump Tower meeting with the Russian visitors. Number 7, further efforts to have the Attorney General take control of the investigation. He called Jeff Sessions in the summer of 2017 to ask him to unrecuse himself. And Sessions declined. But Trump covered himself. Apparently the lawyers had schooled him. In the end, he told Sessions, "I'm not going to do anything or direct you to do anything. I just want to be treated fairly." Number 8, efforts to have McGahn deny that the president had ordered him to have the special counsel removed. We covered that. Number 9, conduct toward Flynn, Manafort, and part of this is redacted. Flynn pleaded guilty to lying, cut a deal with Mueller to cooperate, and then he had to drop out of the group legal cooperation effort, and Trump's lawyers kind of muscled him on that, and then conduct involving Michael Cohen. So those are 10 substantial areas of probable obstruction of justice, and only the Congress, only through impeachment, in my view, can they fully address those issues. Then we look at what Mueller said the investigators struggled with on the obstruction issue, and it revolves around the standard that a sitting president shouldn't be indicted and the feeling that Mueller would prejudice people if he leaned toward embracing the obstruction charges. And this is where I feel Bob Mueller did the limited hangout to prevent his investigation, or at least directly, prevent it from directly leading to the president's indictment or removal from office. And I still don't understand why there wasn't a claim of unindicted co-conspirator addressed at Trump through this whole process, if only in the Michael Cohen shut up the bimbos effort. Next, the Washington Post took a look at what Attorney General Bill Barr buried, misrepresented, or ignored in clearing Trump. And Barr repeatedly used the phrase collusion and claimed that the president had been cleared of that. That is an intentional. Barr is a smart lawyer. He knows the words he chooses to use, and that clearly was intentional on his part. Let's see. Here's a quote from Barr at the news conference today. "Thanks to the special counsel's thorough investigation, we now know that the Russian operatives who perpetrated these schemes did not have the cooperation of President Trump or the Trump campaign, or the knowing assistance of any other Americans for that matter. We've all been exonerated." Isn't that great? I've been waiting for that. I've been feeling so guilty, you can tell, right? Then he overemphasizes the work of the troll farm in St. Petersburg, and this allows Barr to send the message, oh yeah, Russians meddled, but no Americans colluded with that, and this will enable us to prevent it from happening in the future. And here's a little difference between what the Meuller report says and what Barr had represented that it reported. While the investigation identified numerous links between individuals with ties to the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign, the evidence was not sufficient to support criminal charges. That's what Meuller said. Barr had said there was no conspiracy found to violate the law. So there's a difference there. The evidence exists. Meuller says it wasn't sufficient. Barr says, there wasn't any. So these are, important examples of how Bill Barr has attempted to intervene and to control the narrative. His 3-week delay in the release of the report allowed the claims of exoneration by the president to sink in with his political base. Here's another example of modification by Barr. Here's a quote from the first one is from Barr. There's substantial evidence to show the president was frustrated and angered by a sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents and fueled by illegal leaks. Barr continued, nonetheless, the White House fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation. And later, he said, at the same time, the president took no act that in fact deprived the special counsel of the documents and witnesses to complete the investigation. Well, first, the White House didn't fully cooperate. Trump refused to testify. He tweeted interference on an almost daily basis. And another reason that Trump didn't take other actions obstructing justice, obstructing the special counsel, the people who he directed to take those actions refused to comply. And so, in some ways, the saving grace of the Meuller report is that there were adults in the room, or there used to be at the White House, who were able to prevent Trump from acting on his own worst instincts. And finally today, I want to recommend an op-ed in the New York Times under the byline of Noah Bookbinder. He's the new executive director at CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. And he identifies that the Meuller report included 181 pages related to the obstruction issues. And he quotes, Congress has authority to prohibit a president's corrupt use of his authority in order to protect the integrity of the administration of justice. And he says, far from ending the matter, the Meuller report is an unmistakable act of deference to Congress's primary jurisdiction over accountability for the president. And that's what I began with today, friends. It's up to Congress. It's the Democrats who control the House. It's Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler. And I hope they spend this weekend stewing in the Meuller report. And I hope that they have a kind of resurrection of their own political instincts and values, and that they can put aside their partisan concerns about potential blowback from impeachment and do the right thing. I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. But it's what should happen. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Please share it. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.